Sarah Martinez adjusted her worn leather bag as she stepped off the Greyhound bus at Fort Bragg's main gate. The North Carolina heat hit her like a wall, making her simple black dress cling uncomfortably to her skin. She had driven 12 hours from her small hometown in Ohio, carrying nothing but hope and a crumpled letter that had changed everything. The letter was from Captain James Rodriguez, a Navy SEAL who had served with her late brother Miguel in Afghanistan. James had written to tell her that Miguel had saved his life during their final mission together, and that he wanted to present her with Miguel's posthumous Medal of Honor in person. Miguel had been gone for 2 years now, and Sarah still struggled to accept that her baby brother, barely 22 when he died, was truly never coming home. As she approached the security checkpoint, Sarah noticed the guard's eyes scanning her with obvious disdain. Staff Sergeant Rick Thompson was a man who believed his uniform gave him power over everyone around him. At 35, he had spent 15 years in the Army without ever seeing real combat, a fact that ate away at him daily. He compensated for his insecurities by exercising every ounce of authority he could muster over civilians and lower-ranking soldiers. Purpose of visit, Thompson barked without looking up from his clipboard. "I'm here to meet Captain Rodriguez." "He's expecting me," Sarah said softly, pulling out the letter. Her voice carried the weight of recent grief, barely above a whisper. Thompson snatched the letter from her hands roughly, scanning it with exaggerated slowness. "This doesn't look official to me. You could have written this yourself. How do I know you're not some terrorist trying to get on base?" Sarah felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "Sir, if you could just call Captain Rodriguez, he'll verify everything." "I've come a very long way." "I don't think so, sweetheart," Thompson sneered, deliberately emphasizing the condescending term. "You look like trouble to me. These clothes, this attitude. I've seen your type before. Probably some girlfriend he's trying to dump who won't take no for an answer." The accusation hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had carefully chosen her most respectful outfit, the same black dress she had worn to Miguel's funeral. Her hands trembled slightly as she tried to maintain her composure. "Please, sir. My brother died serving this country. Captain Rodriguez just wants to honor his memory." Thompson laughed cruelly. "Right. Dead brother story. How original. Let me guess, he died a hero, saved everyone, real Hollywood stuff?" His voice dripped with sarcasm as other guards began to notice the commotion. Sarah's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "He did die a hero. He saved 7 men, including Captain Rodriguez. He threw himself on a grenade to protect his unit." "Sure he did," Thompson continued, enjoying the power he felt over this vulnerable woman. "And I'm sure you've been dining out on that story ever since, haven't you? Playing the grieving sister card to get sympathy and special treatment?" By now, a small crowd had gathered. Other soldiers passing through the checkpoint stopped to watch the spectacle. Some looked uncomfortable with Thompson's behavior, but none dared speak up against a superior. Sarah felt completely alone and exposed, her private grief being mocked publicly. "I just want to honor my brother's memory," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "Please." Thompson leaned closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper meant only for her. "Listen carefully, little girl. I don't care about your sob story or your fake letter. You're not getting on this base today, tomorrow, or any other day. I suggest you turn around, get back on whatever bus brought you here, and go home to whatever trailer park you crawled out of." The cruelty in his words was deliberate and calculated. Thompson fed off the pain he could see in Sarah's eyes. He had found someone weaker than himself, someone he could control and humiliate, and he intended to make the most of it. "But the ceremony is today," Sarah pleaded, her voice barely audible. "Captain Rodriguez is waiting for me." "No ceremony, no captain, and no entry. End of discussion." Thompson grabbed her arm roughly, his fingers digging into her skin. "Now move along before I have you arrested for trespassing and harassment." Sarah pulled her arm away, rubbing the spot where his fingers had left red marks. She looked around desperately, hoping someone would intervene, but the gathered crowd either looked away or watched with morbid curiosity. She felt completely powerless, just as Thompson intended. "Is there a problem here, Sergeant Thompson?" The voice that cut through the tension belonged to Colonel Patricia Hayes, the base commander's aide. She was a stern woman in her 40s who had worked her way up through the ranks and had no tolerance for abuse of power. Thompson immediately straightened, his demeanor changing completely. "No problem, ma'am. Just dealing with an unauthorized visitor who refuses to leave." Colonel Hayes looked at Sarah, taking in her distressed state and the tears she was fighting to hold back. "Miss, what seems to be the issue?" With shaking hands, Sarah showed Colonel Hayes the letter. As the colonel read, her expression grew increasingly serious. She had known Captain Rodriguez for years and recognized his handwriting immediately. "Sergeant Thompson, this letter is completely authentic. Captain Rodriguez has been expecting this young lady for weeks. Why wasn't she escorted directly to him?" Thompson's face reddened. "Ma'am, I was just being thorough with security protocols. Can't be too careful these days." "Security protocols don't include verbal harassment and intimidation," Colonel Hayes replied coldly. "Miss Martinez, please accept my sincere apologies for your treatment. I'll personally ensure you're escorted to Captain Rodriguez immediately." As Colonel Hayes led Sarah away, Thompson watched with growing rage. He had been humiliated in front of his subordinates and other soldiers. In his twisted mind, this wasn't his fault for abusing his position, but Sarah's fault for making him look bad. He would make sure she paid for that embarrassment. The meeting with Captain Rodriguez was everything Sarah had hoped it would be. He was a kind, soft-spoken man who spoke about Miguel with genuine admiration and love. He told her stories about her brother's courage, his humor, and his deep love for his family back home. When he presented her with Miguel's medal, Sarah finally allowed herself to cry freely. "He talked about you constantly," Captain Rodriguez told her as they sat in his office overlooking the base. "He was so proud of your nursing degree, how you were working double shifts to pay off your student loans. He said you were the strongest person he knew." Sarah clutched the medal to her chest. "I don't feel very strong right now." "Strength isn't about feeling strong all the time," Rodriguez replied gently. "It's about continuing on even when you feel broken. Miguel saw that in you, and so do I." After the ceremony, Rodriguez offered to drive Sarah to the main gate, but she declined, wanting to walk and process everything she had experienced. The medal was safely tucked in her bag, along with photos and letters from Miguel's commanding officers. She felt a sense of closure she hadn't expected. Her peaceful mood was shattered the moment she saw Thompson waiting at the security checkpoint. His shift should have ended hours ago, but he had stayed specifically to continue tormenting her. The smirk on his face told her everything she needed to know. Well. Look who's back," Thompson called out loudly, ensuring everyone could hear. "How was your little fantasy meeting? Did your imaginary captain give you an imaginary medal for your imaginary dead brother?" Sarah tried to walk past him without engaging, but Thompson stepped directly into her path. "Not so fast, princess. I need to check your bag. Security procedure." "You already checked my bag when I arrived," Sarah replied quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. "That was this morning. Things change. I have reason to believe you might be stealing government property." Thompson's voice was loud enough to attract attention from everyone in the area. "I'm not stealing anything," Sarah said, but Thompson had already grabbed her bag and was dumping its contents onto the ground. Miguel's medal clattered onto the concrete, along with the photos and letters. "What do we have here?" Thompson picked up the medal, examining it with exaggerated suspicion. "This looks pretty valuable. Where did you get this?" "Captain Rodriguez gave it to me." "It belonged to my brother," Sarah said, reaching for the medal. Thompson jerked it away from her. "I don't think so. This looks stolen to me. Real medals don't just get handed out to random civilians." Thompson was enjoying himself immensely, watching Sarah's face crumple with despair. "Please," Sarah whispered. "It's all I have left of him." "Should have thought about that before you tried to steal it," Thompson replied, pocketing the medal.
I'm confiscating this as evidence. You'll be hearing from military police.
Sarah dropped to her knees, gathering the scattered photos and letters from the dirty ground. Some had been torn when Thompson dumped them out. She felt completely helpless, watching this cruel man destroy the only tangible connection she had left to her brother. "Stop," she said, her voice stronger now.
"You can't do this. Call Captain Rodriguez. He'll tell you." "I'm not calling anyone," Thompson snapped.
"And if you don't leave immediately, I'll have you arrested for theft and trespassing." As Sarah knelt on the ground, clutching her brother's torn photographs, she felt more alone than she ever had in her life. Miguel was gone, and now this man was taking away even the memory of him. The injustice of it all was overwhelming. What Sarah didn't know was that Captain Rodriguez had been watching from his office window. When he saw Thompson's behavior, his expression hardened into something dangerous. Rodriguez immediately pulled out his phone and began making calls to his unit members who were still on base. Within minutes, word was spreading through the SEAL teams about what was happening at the main gate. These were men who had served with Miguel Martinez, men who had been saved by his sacrifice. They remembered Sarah from Miguel's stories, and they knew exactly what that medal meant to her. As Sarah sat on the ground, trying to piece together her torn memories, she had no idea that 50 of the most elite warriors in the American military were about to learn her name. And, when they did, Staff Sergeant Rick Thompson was going to discover exactly what it meant to threaten someone under their protection. The sun was setting behind the base, casting long shadows across the checkpoint. Sarah gathered what remained of her scattered belongings, her heart breaking all over again. She had come here seeking closure and honor for her brother's memory. Instead, she had found cruelty and humiliation. But change was coming, whether she knew it or not. And tomorrow would bring a reckoning that Thompson would never forget. Sarah spent the night in a modest motel room just outside Fort Bragg, staring at the ceiling and replaying the day's events over and over in her mind. The torn photographs of Miguel lay scattered across the small table, and she had spent hours trying to tape them back together with shaking hands. Each rip felt like another wound to her already broken heart. She couldn't stop thinking about the medal. It wasn't just a piece of metal and ribbon, it was proof that Miguel's sacrifice had meant something, that his life had value, that his death had purpose. Now it was sitting in some storage room or, worse, in Thompson's personal possession, treating her brother's honor like a trophy from his cruelty. Meanwhile, 20 miles away in the SEAL team quarters, Captain James Rodriguez was making phone calls that would change everything. The first call went to Master Chief Petty Officer Daniel "Tank" Morrison, a grizzled veteran who had served 3 tours with Rodriguez and had been Miguel's squad leader during that final, fatal mission. "Tank, I need you to gather the boys," Rodriguez said quietly into his phone, his voice carrying a weight that Tank recognized immediately. "We have a situation involving Miguel Martinez's sister." Tank sat up straighter in his bunk. Miguel Martinez was a name that carried special meaning among their unit. Not just because he had died saving their lives, but because of the way he had lived while serving with them. Miguel had been the guy who called home every week without fail, who sent half his paycheck back to help his sister through nursing school, who carried her picture in his helmet and talked about how proud he was of her. "What kind of situation?" Tank asked, though the dangerous edge in Rodriguez's voice already told him everything he needed to know. Rodriguez told him everything he had witnessed from his office window. As he spoke, Tank's expression grew darker and darker. By the time Rodriguez finished, Tank's hands were clenched into fists that could punch through concrete walls. "That sorry excuse for a soldier took Miguel's medal?" Tank's voice was barely controlled fury. "From Sarah? From Miguel's little sister? Confiscated it and humiliated her in front of half the base," Rodriguez confirmed. "Tank, you should have seen her face. She looked exactly like Miguel when he was hurt but trying not to show it." Tank was already reaching for his boots. "How many of the unit are still on base?" 47, Rodriguez replied without hesitation. He had already checked the roster. Plus Morrison's team from DevGru just rotated back from deployment. "That makes 53 total," Tank calculated quickly. "Close enough to your original number. Rodriguez, you know what this means, right?"
Miguel died saving our lives.
His sister came here seeking closure, seeking to honor his memory, and some power-hungry nobody decided to torture her for sport. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, but Tank could hear the decision being made on the other end of the line. When Rodriguez spoke again, his voice carried the kind of quiet determination that had made him one of the most respected officers in the special operations community. I want every man who was in Afghanistan with us in the team room in 1 hour.
Full briefing on the situation. And, Tank? Make sure they understand that this isn't a request.
As word spread through the SEAL quarters, the reaction was immediate and intense. These were men who had faced down terrorists, survived behind enemy lines, and carried out missions that would never be officially acknowledged. But the story of what had happened to Miguel's sister hit them in a way that surprised even themselves. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Ghost Williams was cleaning his rifle when his roommate burst in with the news. Ghost was known for his calm demeanor and analytical mind, but when he heard about Sarah's treatment, he carefully set down his weapon and stared at the wall for a long moment.
Miguel's sister, he said quietly. The one who sent him care packages every month? The one who was working 3 jobs to pay for nursing school?
That's her, his roommate confirmed. Thompson took her brother's Medal of Honor and called it stolen property. Ghost stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled.
Get my gear ready.
We're going to have a conversation with Staff Sergeant Thompson. Similar scenes were playing out across the base as the story spread. Chief Petty Officer Antonio Vasquez was in the middle of a poker game when his phone buzzed with a text message about the situation. Antonio had been Miguel's closest friend in the unit, the one who had held Miguel as he died, who had promised with his dying friend's blood on his hands that he would look after Sarah if anything ever happened. I'm out, Antonio said, throwing his cards down and standing up abruptly. Come on, man, you're up $200, one of the other players protested. Antonio turned to look at him, and something in his expression made all conversation stop.
Miguel Martinez's sister was just humiliated and robbed by some desk jockey who's never seen combat.
I made a promise to a dying man, and I intend to keep it. The room went dead silent. Everyone there knew Miguel's story, knew how he had died, and knew about the promise Antonio had made. Without another word, the other players began folding their hands and preparing to follow Antonio wherever he was headed. In another part of the base, Sergeant First Class David Reaper-Chen was working late in the communications center when Tank's call came in. Reaper was the unit's technology specialist, a quiet man who preferred computers to people most of the time. But he had a soft spot for underdogs and people who couldn't defend themselves.
What do you need me to do?
Reaper asked after Tank explained the situation. I need everything you can find on Staff Sergeant Rick Thompson. Service record, personnel files, disciplinary actions, everything. And I need it in 30 minutes. Reaper's fingers were already flying across his keyboard before Tank finished speaking.
Consider it done.
As the hour approached, SEALs began converging on the team room from all corners of the base. Some came from training exercises, still covered in sweat and mud. Others came from administrative duties, technical briefings, and equipment maintenance. But they all came, and they all came angry. The team room filled with some of the most dangerous men in the American military, all united by a common purpose. These were warriors who had fought in the darkest corners of the world, men who had seen and done things that would break most people. But they had also served with Miguel Martinez, and they remembered what he had died for. Captain Rodriguez entered the room exactly 1 hour after his call to Tank. The conversation that had been buzzing through the room immediately stopped. 53 pairs of eyes focused on him with laser intensity. Gentlemen, Rodriguez began, his voice carrying clearly through the room. 2 years ago, Petty Officer Third Class Miguel Martinez threw himself on a grenade to save 7 of our lives. He died instantly, but his sacrifice allowed us to complete our mission and return home to our families. A few men nodded, but most remained perfectly still. They all remembered that day, remembered Miguel's laugh that morning at breakfast, remembered the way he had talked about Sarah's upcoming graduation from nursing school.
Miguel had one sister, Sarah Martinez, age 24. She worked 3 jobs to put herself through nursing school while Miguel was deployed. Every paycheck he sent home went toward her student loans and living expenses. Every letter he wrote was about how proud he was of her. Rodriguez paused, letting the memories settle. Today, Sarah came to Fort Bragg for the first time. She came here because I invited her to receive Miguel's posthumous Medal of Honor.
She came here to honor her brother's memory and find some measure of closure for her grief.
The tension in the room was palpable now. These men could sense that something terrible was coming. Instead of finding honor and closure, Sarah was verbally abused, physically intimidated, and humiliated by Staff Sergeant Rick Thompson at the main gate. Thompson confiscated Miguel's Medal of Honor, calling it stolen property. He dumped Sarah's personal belongings on the ground, tore her photographs of Miguel, and sent her away in tears. The silence that followed Rodriguez's words was deadly. It was the kind of silence that came before violence, the kind that preceded missions that would never appear in official records. Tank stood up slowly, his massive frame casting a shadow across half the room.
"Captain, what are your orders?" Rodriguez looked around the room, meeting the eyes of men who had followed him through hell and back.
"No orders, Tank. This isn't official. This isn't military business. This is personal."
A smile that would have terrified most civilians spread across Tank's face.
"Understood, sir. No orders received."
However, Rodriguez continued, "I thought you should all know that Staff Sergeant Thompson will be working the night shift at the main gate starting at 2200 hours tonight.
And he'll be working alone."
Reaper cleared his throat from the back of the room.
"Captain, I have that information you requested on Thompson."
He stood up, reading from a tablet. "Staff Sergeant Rick Thompson, 15 years of service, no combat deployments, no commendations for valor, 3 disciplinary actions for abuse of authority, 2 complaints filed for harassment of civilians."
"Interesting," Tank commented. "Sounds like this isn't his first time bullying people who can't fight back."
"There's more," Reaper continued. "Thompson was passed over for promotion twice due to poor leadership evaluations.
Multiple subordinates have requested transfers away from his units. Pattern of behavior suggests someone who compensates for insecurity by exercising power over vulnerable individuals."
Chief Vasquez spoke up from his position near the door.
"Sounds like the kind of guy who needs a lesson in humility. Sounds like the kind of guy who's been getting away with his behavior for too long," Ghost added quietly.
Rodriguez looked around the room one more time. "Gentlemen, I can't stress enough that this is not an official military operation. Anything that happens tonight is entirely coincidental and completely unrelated to this briefing."
"Is that clear?"
"Crystal clear, sir," Tank replied for the group. "We were never here, this briefing never happened, and any actions taken by individual service members are purely personal in nature."
"Good," Rodriguez said. "Then, this meeting is dismissed. I suggest everyone get a good night's sleep."
As the men began filing out of the room, small groups formed naturally. These were men who had trained together, fought together, and trusted each other with their lives.
They didn't need detailed plans or complex strategies. They knew how to work as a team, and they knew how to send a message. Tank caught up with Rodriguez as he was leaving. "Captain, what about Sarah? She's probably devastated right now." Rodriguez nodded grimly.
"I called the motel where she's staying.
Left a message asking her to meet me tomorrow morning at 0800 for breakfast.
Told her I had something important to discuss regarding her brother's medal."
"You think she'll show?"
"She'll show," Rodriguez said with certainty.
"She's Miguel's sister. She doesn't give up easily."
As the SEALs dispersed across the base, each man was thinking about Miguel Martinez and the sister he had loved so much. They thought about the promises they had made to dying friends, about honor and loyalty, and about what happened to bullies who picked on the wrong person.
Staff Sergeant Thompson had no idea what was coming his way.
He was at home, probably congratulating himself on putting some uppity civilian in her place, completely unaware that he had just declared war on 53 of the most elite warriors in the American military. By morning, he would learn that there are some lines that should never be crossed, and some people who should never be threatened.
Miguel Martinez was gone, but his brothers in arms were very much alive, and they had long memories for both kindness and cruelty. The night shift was about to begin, and it would be one that Fort Bragg would remember for years to come. Staff Sergeant Rick Thompson arrived for his night shift at the main gate with a spring in his step and a cruel smile on his face. He had spent the evening reliving his encounter with Sarah Martinez, savoring the memory of her tears and the power he had felt in that moment. The Medal of Honor was safely locked in his desk drawer back home, a trophy of his victory over someone who had dared to challenge his authority. Thompson had always been a small man in every way that mattered. At 5 feet 8 inches and barely 160 pounds, he had compensated for his physical limitations by becoming a master manipulator and bully. He had learned early in his career that the uniform gave him power over civilians, and he had spent 15 years perfecting the art of making other people feel small and helpless. What Thompson didn't understand was that real power didn't come from a uniform or a position. Real power came from earning the respect of people who chose to follow you, from protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, and from standing up for what was right even when it was difficult. These were concepts completely foreign to Thompson's worldview. As he settled into the guard post at exactly 2200 hours, Thompson felt completely secure in his little kingdom. The night shift was typically quiet, with minimal traffic and virtually no supervision. It was the perfect time for him to exercise his authority without interference from higher-ranking officers who might question his methods. He had been on duty for exactly 17 minutes when the first SEAL arrived. Master Chief Petty Officer Daniel Tank Morrison appeared out of the darkness like a shadow given form. At 6 feet 4 inches and 240 pounds of solid muscle, Tank was an imposing figure under any circumstances. But, in the dim lighting of the security checkpoint, wearing full combat gear and carrying an expression that could melt steel, he looked like something from Thompson's worst nightmares. "Evening, Sergeant," Tank said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of controlled menace that made smart people step aside and stupid people make very bad decisions. Thompson looked up from his paperwork, immediately feeling intimidated by Tank's presence but trying to mask it with false bravado. "What can I do for you, Chief?" Tank stepped closer to the security window, his movement deliberate and predatory. "I heard you had an interesting interaction with a civilian today. Young lady named Sarah Martinez." Thompson's stomach dropped, but he tried to maintain his composure. "I don't discuss security matters with unauthorized personnel." Tank smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Unauthorized personnel? Son, I've been authorized to kill people in 17 different countries. I think I can handle discussing a conversation at a security checkpoint." Before Thompson could respond, 2 more figures emerged from the shadows. Chief Petty Officer Antonio Vasquez approached from the left, while Petty Officer First Class Marcus Ghost Williams materialized from the right. The 3 SEALs formed a loose triangle around the security booth, cutting off Thompson's potential escape routes without making any overtly threatening moves. "Gentlemen, this is highly irregular," Thompson stammered, his voice cracking slightly. "I'm going to have to ask you to move along." Ghost spoke for the first time, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're not going anywhere, Sergeant. We're here to discuss Miguel Martinez." At the mention of Miguel's name, Thompson felt a chill run down his spine. He was beginning to realize that this wasn't a coincidental encounter. These men knew something, and they were here for a specific purpose. "I don't know who that is," Thompson lied, but his voice betrayed his fear. Vasquez laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Really? You don't remember the brave young Marine whose Medal of Honor you confiscated today? The one whose sister you made cry at this very checkpoint?" More figures began emerging from the darkness. SEALs appeared from behind buildings, from parking lots, from shadows that Thompson hadn't even known existed. Within minutes, he was surrounded by more than 20 of the most dangerous men in the American military, all standing silently and watching him with expressions that promised violence. "What do you want?" Thompson asked, his voice now openly trembling. Tank stepped closer to the window, close enough that Thompson could see the controlled fury in his eyes. "We want to tell you a story, Sergeant. A story about a young man named Miguel Martinez who died saving the lives of 7 Navy SEALs. Miguel was 22 years old," Vasquez continued,
picking up the narrative. He had been in the service for 3 years, deployed twice to Afghanistan. He was what we call a good Marine, always first to volunteer, last to complain, first to help a buddy in need. Ghost moved closer, his voice still barely audible but somehow more menacing because of it. Miguel had one sister, Sarah. Everything he did was for her. Every paycheck he sent home, every letter he wrote, every prayer he said was about making sure she could finish nursing school and build a good life. More SEALs continued arriving, forming concentric circles around the security checkpoint. Thompson began to realize that this wasn't just a few angry soldiers. This was an entire unit, united in their purpose and completely focused on him. 2 years ago, Tank continued, our unit was conducting operations in the Helmand province. Intelligence had identified a high-value target holed up in a compound outside Marja. It was supposed to be a simple extraction mission. Sergeant First Class David Reaperchin stepped forward, holding a tablet displaying official mission reports. Intelligence was wrong. The compound was heavily fortified and defended by approximately 40 enemy combatants. Our unit of 12 was outnumbered more than 3 to 1. Thompson tried to interrupt. Look, I don't need to hear war stories. I just want to do my job and shut up, Tank said quietly, and something in his voice made Thompson's mouth snap closed immediately. You're going to listen to every word of this story, because it's important that you understand exactly who you humiliated today. Vasquez took over the narrative. The extraction went bad fast. We were pinned down in an alleyway with nowhere to go. Enemy fire was coming from 3 directions, and they were closing in fast. Miguel was carrying the radio, our only communication with air support. A grenade landed right in the middle of our position, Ghost added, his voice growing even quieter. We all saw it at the same time. 7 seasoned Navy SEALs, all frozen for just a split second, all knowing we were about to die. Tank's voice became thick with emotion. Miguel didn't freeze. He dropped his rifle, threw himself on that grenade, and absorbed the entire blast with his body. He died instantly, but his sacrifice saved 7 lives. The circle of SEALs had grown to more than 30 now, with more arriving every few minutes. Thompson realized with growing horror that these men were telling him this story for a reason, and that reason wasn't going to be pleasant for him. Miguel's last words, Vasquez said, his voice breaking slightly, were tell Sarah I love her, and that everything I did was for her. He didn't think about himself, didn't think about the pain, didn't think about the fact that he was 22 years old and would never see home again. He thought about his sister. Reaper looked up from his tablet. Miguel Martinez was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions that day. The citation reads, in part, Petty Officer Martinez's selfless sacrifice and unwavering devotion to his fellow servicemen embody the highest traditions of the naval service and reflect great credit upon himself and the United States Navy. Tank leaned against the security window, bringing his face close to Thompson's. That medal you took today? That wasn't just a piece of metal and ribbon. That was proof that Miguel's life meant something, that his death served a purpose, that his sacrifice saved the lives of 7 men who went home to their families because of what he did. And, his sister, Ghost added, the one you humiliated and called a liar, is the same sister he died thinking about. The same sister who worked 3 jobs to put herself through nursing school because Miguel believed she could save lives just like he did. The crowd of SEALs had grown to more than 40 now. Thompson was completely surrounded by men who looked like they could kill him with their bare hands without breaking a sweat. But, somehow, the physical threat wasn't what terrified him most. It was the realization that he had committed a sin so profound that these elite warriors had united to deliver justice. You took Miguel's medal, Tank said simply. You humiliated his sister. You mocked his sacrifice. You called his heroism a lie. Thompson tried to speak, tried to explain, tried to justify his actions, but no words came. He was facing something he had never encountered before, men who were stronger, braver, and more righteous than he could ever hope to be. Vasquez stepped forward. Here's what's going to happen, Sergeant. You're going to go home tonight, and you're going to bring Miguel's medal back here. You're going to personally apologize to Sarah Martinez for your behavior.
And you're going to do it in front of all of us. And if you don't, Ghost added softly, we're going to make sure that every person on this base knows exactly what kind of man you are. We're going to tell them how you stole a Medal of Honor and made a war hero's sister cry for your own amusement. Tank smiled again, and Thompson realized that this was somehow worse than any physical threat. See, the thing about reputation is that it takes years to build and seconds to destroy. Right now, you have a choice. You can do the right thing, apologize, and maybe salvage some small piece of dignity. Or you can double down on your cruelty and discover what it feels like to be the most hated man on Fort Bragg. More SEALs continued to arrive, the circle growing larger and more imposing with each passing minute. Thompson realized that word of this confrontation was spreading through the special operations community like wildfire, and that every elite warrior on the base was choosing to stand with Miguel's memory rather than with military protocol. We don't want to hurt you, Tank continued, though his tone suggested otherwise. We just want you to understand that you picked the wrong family to mess with. Miguel Martinez died protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. His sister dedicates her life to healing people who are hurt and vulnerable. And we've dedicated our lives to protecting people like them from people like you. The message was clear, and Thompson finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. He hadn't just bullied a random civilian. He had attacked the family of a fallen hero, a man whose sacrifice had saved the lives of some of the most dangerous people in the world. You have until 0800 hours tomorrow, Vasquez said. That's when Sarah is meeting Captain Rodriguez for breakfast. You will be there, with the medal, ready to apologize. Ghost stepped closer. And, Sergeant? Your apology better be sincere. Because we'll know if it's not, and there won't be a second chance. As the SEALs began to disperse back into the shadows, Tank lingered for a moment. One more thing, Thompson. If you ever, and I mean ever, mistreat another person seeking to honor a fallen service member, we'll hear about it. And, next time, we won't be so polite. Thompson sat alone in his security booth, surrounded by the silence of the night and the weight of his own cowardice. For the first time in his life, he had encountered men who were everything he pretended to be: strong, honorable, and willing to fight for what was.